Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And I received the Tao maybe 8 years ago, and it has fundamentally changed who I am as a person. My habitual nature remains, but a lot of my habitual nature fell away, and my true nature was to come out into the eternal wilderness, and as a result, find my voice on the radio and connect with spirits who are also trying to raise frequencies, to raise the ultimate vibration, world vibration, and I am convinced now I've met one of the most liberated people that I've ever interviewed, including master musicians. She's found her individual voice, cultivating through what I believe is a lot of personal experience, real life application. This is not like an ivory tower cat. She likes to let the body dance, and she likes to explore the modern dilemmas that face the metrosexuals and the rural Americans and the people around the world and the countries that aren't procreating anymore, and why that is. And she's a deep cat, and she is one of my teachers. Sarah Byrden, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake. Thank you for having me.
You know, it's an honor to have you. The mother of my children grew up with a bed sheet separating her brothers and sisters from her parents. So she, back in the 70s, was privy to their sex all the time. And it was in Taiwan. And I just wonder, in your travels to the East, if you could talk about it's the wrong word, innocence, but it's there. How is sexuality different there in actual, just sort of like, because they were basically seeing their parents having sex.
Right.
And is it still that way? Were you impacted by that when you did your travels there?
I think it's hard to make just sort of a general statement about like what is happening with sex in the East, but for sure that is true, because it would be so variegated based on country. And I think every culture, especially in like our modern day and the navigations we have, is navigating in some way some fracture or shadow in sexual expression, some interface or intersection. But I think there's a reality in the way people are living, the way families are living outside of the United States, I'll speak to, because that's where I live and where I'm from, that families are living together and sharing rooms, and children are in rooms with parents. Families are sleeping on mats on the floor. All of the kids in a room with the parents. And there's just a lot, there isn't the same privacy that we have here.
Is that the right word? Is that the right word, though, or is it barriers? Don't you think it's therapeutic in some ways for children to see their parents in the act of sex?
I think it depends on how that's being held and how that's being expressed. I think when it is a natural part, it's really different if you live in a one-room house.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Indonesia,
right?
And it's a part of your world, and you wake up and your parents are having sex next to you. I will say, it's another conversation about what kind of sex is that? What are the dynamics of that sexual world in terms of gender roles and gender dynamics? And I want to be careful that we're not just elevating Eastern culture to something that we don't have happening here, because there's
No,
also
no,
a
no,
lot of
no, no, no. I
dynamics
want to be
there.
very clear with you. And you were very articulate in this TED talk. We're being bounced back between, repression versus, sort of like this like surreal view of sex. And so I wanted you to talk about specifically what you witnessed that was awe-inspiring to you about the innocence. Take the roles out of it, take the dynamics out of it. It's just mankind. We are all human animals.
I mean, most of my time abroad has been spent in Indonesia and working for a company based in doing sort of cross-cultural immersion and immersive experiences with students there. And, it's very different. I mean, I'm recalling several villages in eastern Indonesia that I had the privilege of spending time in and living with families. And the experience of waking in the night in a bedroom that I was given as a Western guest, and so parents are sleeping on the floor with 3 or 4 kids, and waking up to sex. Parents having sex in the house, and who knows whether those kids were sleeping or they were awake. And, hearing the sort of like calls and cries I remember of sexual ecstasy through this village of another couple having sex. But there's nothing to say. I mean, that's what I want to be careful about, is there's nothing to say that is not just sex that's happening under the guise of male pleasure demanding sex when he needs sex.
No, nobody's saying that. This is the wilderness. We're in the wilderness. I mean, the wildness. I mean, this is the point, is that what you talked about is that it's some kind of thing in the West that is sacrilege till a certain age. It's done behind closed doors. It's done in we are not human. We are not that evolved. And you know that. So the point is that I'm just asking about, there's a balance clearly, but when there's nothing, I mean, I guess that's what I'm saying. Isn't that why you got passionate about what you're doing? Do you feel like your move going to the East and immersing yourself in the culture got you on this path that you're on?
It's not.
No.
And that's actually, I'm glad you're asking that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because when I speak about, in that TED Talk, when I speak about what is happening in the West, I'm using that language because that's what I know. That's where I'm from. That's the pool I'm swimming in. That's what I'm seeing on college campuses. That is the dialogue that I'm in the midst of. It's not because I have some in-depth experience of an enlightened sexual reality, have people studying sexual interaction and sex in other countries, but I do want to be careful that we're not comparing that. That actually wasn't the impulse for me. The reason I named the West is because that is the place that I am standing inside of the history that is here, specifically in the United States, based on our history, based on what has come down in our colonial evolution in our modern reality, and what I see playing out. I mean, I have 2 branches of my work, I guess. One is that I work with students on college campuses. I have very much so in the past, and watching what started blowing up there when we started paying attention to sexual assault numbers. And then the other branch of the work I do is I work with adults in a post-Taoist and very Taoist-influenced sexual lens through a tradition I've studied in called the Moga Dao tradition. But I am definitely not in any way able to speak about current sexual realities in China, in Thailand, in Asia. No way.
No, and nobody's asking you to, because you know what, this is your interview. I want your own personal real life experiences. We are all part of the same source, and you actually went there. I guess my question is, when did you have traumatic sexual experiences, or did you learn how to keep yourself in your body?
So I would say I have I have never been raped. I have never had a like violent sexual violation.
Mm-hmm.
I have never had an experience like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will say is I think that almost every single one of us, and this isn't to make put anything in a hierarchy or downplay what it is to have a large scale sexual violation, but we are all living with a sexual trauma in this country and dissociating and leaving our bodies all the time,
I
even
agree.
in what we think of as healthy sexual relationships.
Sure.
So I didn't get into this field of work because I had, let's say, a violated sexual history. I got into this field of work because through a path that I actually think is incredibly common, which is that I grew up thinking, because I went to a Catholic school growing up. I got a sex education that was about procreation and pregnancy. I came from, it was never really spoken about in our house. I was really feeling my own way, and I walked through my life feeling like there was just something fundamentally wrong with me. Fundamentally wrong with me for the questions that I had, for the way I did or didn't want to engage sexually. My puberty years were spent, my father died when I was 13. And so at the time when everyone in my class was exploring sexually and coming into sort of that place of puberty and all of that beautiful young fire and exploration, I was grieving, and I had no idea I was grieving. All I knew was that dating and sex were so far from my own, that is not what I was interested in. And I remember the experience of kind of shock when I would find out that boys had crushes on me and wanted to date me. And it was sort of this move out of left field that I was like, oh, wow, I am a sexual being. Wow, I never considered myself a sexual being. I have spent the last, 7 years with a sick father and on the other side of what it is to be entering a new high school and a kid can go all kinds of directions with that, right? Like I had my own process, but I was a slow bloomer.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I think that people go through growth spurts even through their later years. I understand what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Believe me, I was channeling. I did not have to overcome that kind of adversity at your age, but I felt the same way. I just oftentimes wonder about, some people that get on. Was there a point when you surrendered instead of thinking about, well, you were raised in a Catholic school, and I don't know what that experience is like, but as far as sex ed is concerned, the woman's role is to birth children for the man. Is that right? There's no like other. I'm just trying to figure out when you say that.
I didn't take that on. I wouldn't say like I took that on. That wasn't a way like I oriented myself. It just was like, it's just definitely like an overlay that was there in the background for me.
Because you're so because you're so articulate and eloquent about this stuff. I wonder if you could talk about if you have the perspective now of what you wished you were exposed to that you weren't exposed to as a girl that maybe other people are struggling with right now that are listening to this.
Jake, and I'm not like avoiding it because it's not just, it's a cultural issue. It's not just like I wish that I had had this conversation, but I wish that I had been around and had modeling of a healthy sexual relationship, of some avenue for learning about my body that wasn't littered with either shame or pressure to push past my own timing in my sexual opening. I wish that I had been able to be in rooms where we were talking openly about what we had questions about and what we were wondering about. In essence, to be honest with you, it's like what I do, like I wish I had me. That, like what I do now, I do because that's what I wish I had.
I know.
I sort of like,
I know. Yeah. I know. I can. And it's beautiful. It's actually really. I'm just wondering, like, because you're, sometimes it's the loneliest avenue, but you know actually now that you're far from alone, and that there are now a younger generation of cats like coming up, like my older daughter. I think about in my heart right now when you're talking about the the weight of the trauma of losing your dad. I mean, the last thing on your mind, in some ways, was what other kids are moving into. But I to me, it's like, let me just play you this audio clip. So I've done like 1,500 radio interviews with a lot of like musicians and artists, creatives, and I'm moving more towards, accessing the multidimensional self. But this was a interview I did. Just take a listen to the content, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, Nelson's music is what Nelson calls the heartbeat tempo. He talks about tempo being the tempo of the heartbeat, and his also talking depending how late it was, he would talk about it. It's the rhythm of sex. So so it was that two feel, which came out of Jimmy Lunsford. So we were playing basically a two thing, very simple, and we just locked in on 1 and 3 is almost a businessman's bounce until it went into the 4 feel, and then it was a straight ahead kind of thing, but very, very simple. Once again, we kept a loose, tight kind of feeling. Steve played on top of the beat. I loved the way where Steve played, put the time. But, if you varied from that, Nelson got bugged. I had a very famous drummer sub for me in New York with Nelson because I couldn't do it. I came in after the rehearsal to see how things were going. He said, go over and show that guy how to play it. And so Nelson was very...
All right, my friend, that was a guy named Michael Berkowitz. I'm going to read back the quote. He was talking about Nelson Riddle, who was Frank Sinatra's musical director. And he said that... He said Nelson called his music the heartbeat tempo. He talks about the tempo being the tempo of the heartbeat, or depending on how late it was, he would say it's the rhythm of sex. And I wanted you to talk about, you talked about a healthy sexual relationship, and let's just focus in on the physical part of it. What is your understanding, and what can you talk to people about the rhythm of a healthy sex relationship?
I mean, the reality is like everyone's rhythm of a healthy sexual relationship is going to be really different. I think, I'm in the middle of a sexuality course right now, and one of the teaching and a demand toward some outcome, toward some usually strong climb to whatever our conception of climax is, some preconception of what it is to actually engage in sex, and what is it for two bodies to actually be with each other and really be there with all of themselves, not to feel like they have to be in a particular mood or leave, that they can bring their humanity into that sexual world, that there is a reciprocity, that there is a listening. A healthy sexual relationship requires two people to be like actually in their body, communicating with each other, interested in what's unfolding in the space between them. Friendship is a really powerful place in a healthy sexual relationship. Play, exploration, tenderness, fierceness. I mean, it's like, it goes all over the entire spectrum. But something that's like, we're in this together and we're talking about it and we're interested in each other. And we're also available to being vulnerable and talking about or being inside of where our own nervousness and shame is, and letting it just begin to melt inside of a different expectation. I mean, I can't tell you, there is so much pressure on performance and on what sex actually is that is shortchanging our experience left and right.
When did the performance? How do you, in your research and just sort of true heart fire and love, when did the performance part of it come into play? Because, I mean, cats 100 years ago were having like 15 kids. Obviously, they had to work on the farm, and then the families have gotten smaller and smaller, and it relates to pressure because of performance. But it didn't used to be like that. How did it change?
I mean, who's to say it didn't relate to performance when people were just procreating? I mean, let's just talk about like male-bodied performance. I mean, the terror and the crisis around erection is probably universal. It's probably been happening for quite a long time, outside of a paradigm that can understand that like the phallus, the male phallus, does not just have two switches, and it is not just valuable when it is erect, and the incredible amount of performance and shame and hiding and negotiation and strategy that happens through in the male mind and in the male body around, like, you know, strutting feathers, and that's that's in the natural kingdom, you know. But what is it to like strut feathers in the reality
I dig.
of how a body actually behaves? I mean, this is, you know, I don't want to, this is such a cliche statement, so I don't want it to like
Go as deep as you want, yeah.
Well, I mean, the digital pornography, it's like, has been a huge influence on a kind of pressure and script around sex that was not there when we were just using our imagination with images and kind of finding our way.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
That has given a visual script that is always coming from usually some unrealistic demand on what that's supposed to look like, that necessitates checking out and holding the breath and gritting the teeth and just like going for it, doing it. I mean, think of the things that play out between couples in bed, whether they are homosexual, no matter what body or gender they are in, heterosexual, of all the little dances and negotiations that happen of, okay, I'm checking in with what's happening in my body. I'm not sure what's happening in your body. I'm not sure what mood I'm in. Maybe I'll roll over. Maybe I'll pretend I'm asleep. Maybe I'll like all of the negotiations there, dancing around a reality that is like waiting to be engaged in, which is, oh, does it always mean penetration when we have sex? Is that what it in that landscape? What is it to actually be with someone and explore without taking our roads from A to B for whatever sexual satisfaction we perceive we have? All of the ways we push down emotion or cut off whatever's actually showing up in the room, or I'm not in the mood, are little definitions of what it is to be in the mood or not in the mood. But there's been a very dangerous thing put forward in digital pornography that is showing a kind of sexual engagement often. And yes, I understand there is like beautiful artful pornography that is inviting people into creativity and playfulness and all kinds of things. But often what that becomes is a subconscious demand of, oh, that's what it is to be a man and have sex. That's what it is to be in a woman's body, receiving or pretending she's receiving pleasure. That's a timeline that I'm going for. I mean, the mismatched timelines inside of sexual experience based on what we think is supposed to happen or what we're afraid is going to happen. It's so limiting. And I feel so like passionate about this because I feel like our sexual arenas, it's like most of us are thinking about them almost all the time in the back of our mind. My marriage is amazing, except for our sex life. We don't talk about it, we don't do it, or we have sex once a month and it's fine. The level of grief inside of long-term partnerships around what is happening or not happening in the sexual life is pervasive because we're like caught inside of something that is, and we think we're alone in that. Like everyone is in a navigation around their sexual sphere. And I think one of the biggest things I say every time I teach is like, we're all feeling our way in the dark and pretending that we know what the heck is going on. And that's where the performance and the puffed up, it's like if you got in bed with your partner of however many years or your new partner and in the back of your mind understood like, wow, we are just exploring together and nobody like really knows and we're in this exploring and we don't have to pretend like we've got it all together, what kind of sex would we be having?
Yeah, it would be wonderful.
It could be.
I mean,
more wonderful.
What in a relationship? What is the woman? What is a healthy woman's role in a heterosexual relationship?
I can't. I can't.
Because you use these two terms. You use these two terms, roles and dynamics. And I'm trying to figure out.
I said role.
I mean, this is going back to like 20. Role? I mean, it doesn't even matter. The point is that okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is, no, you were alluding to the Eastern, like when you were in Indonesia and, the parents were having sex and you didn't, you said, God knows if those children were even awake or not. And
I said, who knows?
Who knows? You know, but I'm saying, in a healthy relationship, what dynamics does the woman play, and when can she be, when can she enter her elemental self and be that tiger? I mean, basically the person that takes control.
Yeah. I mean, there is no, quote, healthy role for a woman to play in a sexual dynamic, nor for a man to play.
Really? I'm sorry. Yeah, no, don't hold me. Just don't punish me with words. Just go. You just riff on it the right way it's supposed to be.
Okay. I mean, I think I get in the second part of that question that, I think, and this is something I learned with my teacher in studying in the Mogadao work, and that I experienced for sure, is that there is a false understanding and definition of the feminine as passive. That is the female role as passive, and that inside of the deep and true feminine, no matter what body that is coming through, there is such a tremendous amount of volcanic power underneath, like rumbling underneath the surface, playing it quiet and passive and small, because of that is how women think that they are. Men who are exhausted, absolutely exhausted by feeling like they have to be the initiator, they have to be the performer, they have to have it all together, they have to know what they're doing. And that is exhausting. And so to open the door for women to tap into and to express something that feels deep and primordial and carnal and fierce and knowing and generous and all the textures of that, something so beyond, oh, I'm a woman having sex, laying on my back, receiving and pretending it feels good. I'll just say that as like a pretty sweeping stereotype, but it will hit the nail on the head for a lot of people. That is what I'm doing. And we have to move into like the width that actually exists inside of us. That is not, we are exhausted and dying inside of the roles we have assumed. And only we know what those roles are. And for one woman, it might be that she's actually tired of being carnal and fierce and the like, quote, animal in bed. And she wants to soften into something that has space to soften into something. It's like we have to get out of roles. Unless we're actually role playing, then that's fun. And if that's consensual and mutual, then that is actually, there's a lot of erotic charge there. But in terms of the roles and the autopilot, I mean, we are falling asleep at the wheel, and we know it in this kind of like humdrum, I'm in my role, you're in your role, autopilot, push this button, go there, we just had sex, both people turn over falling asleep thinking, wow, that was really unsatisfying. That was not.
Okay, Sarah,
did not
I know.
touch
I mean, because
something.
you are too much of a light spirit to be dwelling in this negativity. I want to ask you, do you believe that we are not really supposed to be bound? Because what you're talking about is obligation. In order to be a normal, functioning, quote unquote, couple, we need to have sex this many times a week or this many times a month, but it's a chore. You dig? It's not real.
Right.
So the question is, do you advocate for open relationships?
I don't advocate for anything across the board.
Of course you don't. You're very
Like,
I love this stuff. So I mean, what don't you? Because you're talking about the multidimensional, divine feminine spirit rising up. That only comes through deep attraction. And you talked about it before with no expectations. If you just started to explore and what that would be like and how exciting that would be and the kind of sex that you could potentially have. And the question here is, I mean, there really isn't an answer to the domesticated lifestyle when you get into a point where it's just something to check off a box, because that's that's not what sex is, and that's not what it is meant to be.
right. I mean, I think that's a question. When I say explore in that context, I'm talking about like actually between just two partners who are already together.
Absolutely. I know what you're talking about.
Right now.
Yeah.
But that is a really personal question for people, that like there is no, I don't hold any, like, for some people moving into open relationships is freeing to the spirit of both partners. That feels liberating and deepening and enriching to the dynamic of the partnership. For other people, working inside of the crucible and the incubator of monogamy and commitment is the path that is toward more depth and more connection and more intimacy. But it has to be really felt from the inside out. And I mean, and that is, we spend, I think, a lot of time exploring what that might be. Open relationship, monogamy, what are the boundaries of our monogamy? I mean, I think we see open relationships being explored more because I think there is a kickback happening to certain constrictions of like conventional marriage and you know, scripts. Is that, and is it enriching both people, and is it bringing them closer in the exploration and the risk of that, or is there something, you know, or are we opening up the relationship because we're actually hiding, or we're actually shying away from a depth that is just being sought elsewhere without actually going all the way to the truth of what's happening between the two people that we've started with? The risk of like, what is that? What is happening here? Have we told all of our truths? I mean, I think one of the things I for sure learned deeply from my teacher, Genzon, is the reality that like sex doesn't start dying in a relationship because like we don't have enough fun tricks. Sex starts dying in a conventional relationship because two people stop telling the truth to each other, and they start watering down over time in an almost barely detectable way the truth of who it was that brought them together in the first place. Compromise and let me hold this back and I won't quite say that, and then you just sort of have this murky territory that's like, well, should we open it up? Well, maybe, but there's also a lot more truth to be told here to see if that truth breaks us into new territories. Like actually being honest with each other, actually risking what will happen if I say this thing to you that might have nothing to do with sex, but it will translate into the bedroom, quote. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's a deep well. I mean, that's all I can say. It's a really deep well. I wonder how vulnerable you are to receiving love. You give so much. You do TED Talks. I mean, I'm so impressive. You know, you are very well schooled. You know, you have done a lot of. You're a street scholar. You have also done a lot of work at the academic level, and you are helping people, trying to inspire people to be themselves. But I wonder about Sarah Burden's ability to receive, be vulnerable enough to receive love.
I'm not sure how to where to go that. I have an incredibly deep personal world and landscape, and yeah, I don't know that I have any comment about that. I wonder about my ability to be vulnerable and where I stand in that equation a lot every day. And I'm navigating that, as I think all of us are.
Right. I mean,
I'm not sure.
You know, in some cases, like with the musicians that I interview, a lot of them are empaths. A lot of them are constantly giving off vibration to heal other people, and they're givers. But when it comes to receiving love, it is a very big struggle for them to receive it, and sometimes it can lead to, people wind up drowning because they never have given themselves enough room. And I mean, you have to be able to love yourself, but you give a lot. And I just wonder, as you talk to me, and you talk about how things are or are perceived to be, and how perverted they are, I just wonder how much of that is a reflection of your own mirror of being able to receive love, to be in a relationship that you riff on as the healthy relationship. Is that something that you've attained before? What does that feel like? And where are you now?
I mean, I think those are really different territories. I'm speaking into what I spend a lot of time observing in conversation with. I'm not speaking about like my own personal love and sexual relationships, though. Have I experienced everything I'm talking about? Yeah, totally. Is there like a way, like this isn't just sort of like an academic study for me. It's like the reason I got into it was like, something here is not being spoken. And I certainly can't be alone in this. I've had incredibly fulfilling, loving sexual relationships. I've had very dissatisfying, unfulfilling sexual
Advice to people that are in unsatisfying sexual relationships. I mean, ultimately, codependency can come into play. And how did you break away from that? How did it make you stronger?
Break away from codependency? I'm not sure I was ever in a codependent relationship.
You said there was some very unhealthy relationship. I guess whatever that means to you when you say it was not productive. For people that are out there listening that are in relationships that are dead, what is your advice?
Well, it depends on the context. What I'll say is that my long-term relationships, I think, have been healthy sexually. Where I have had unhealthy dynamics is where I've been in, let's say, periods of being single and sleeping with people that I wasn't actually that interested in, and feeling like, you know what, this is actually taking away from my own. This is not working for me. That's a dynamic that I think is pervasive, where we make choices that aren't as discerning as we want them to be, that speak for something deeper for us. But I mean, what is my advice for people?
I just think that there are people that you're fearless enough to talk about this stuff. It's for people that are still.
No, I know.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, if someone's going to tell the truth, it's going to be you. And I think people need to sometimes. Yeah, everyone's listening, even when you don't think they're listening. You know.
I'm just pausing because I think that advice is different for each person. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
I think for some people that is listen to the wisdom that you have about what's happening in your relationship. Open it up into risking telling truths that you maybe haven't been telling, especially in bed, getting honest about what actually feels good, about what doesn't feel good, about what hurts. And I mean, of course, physically, but I mean, wow, what is it to be in the vulnerability of rejection when a partner turns over and pretends they're sleeping? That. Like, not just moving into the status quo and autopilot, like opening into a possible risk to say what's on your heart in the moment. And only in that do you understand if you're with a partner that's interested in actually deepening and opening up the territory. We have no idea if we're going to be met in that until we open the door. I think there's a lot of like silent grief that happens in sexual partnerships. I think there's a lot of silence, there's a lot of putting up with. And ultimately at the end of it, I often see that it's because like we're all taking the whole thing personally. And if we trace back and back and back and back, we can realize like it's actually not that personal, that we have not been given like a functioning narrative of possibility. So what is it to be a man in bed in a shame or fear about your erection, about your lack of erection, about your desirability, and to stay in bed with the person that you're with and be in that, knowing that like that's not just personal to you. The reason there's shame there is because we've never been given any map that says, oh, right, your entire sexual world is so much more than your erection. Or for women to be given more agency to speak up and to not be catering to just making their partners think they're making them feel good and say, you know what, this is like totally not working for me. Let's explore.
I mean, okay, so let me ask you something, because in your work, what has been like a couple that has come to you? How has it, can you give an example of how to cultivate a healthy sexual relationship? Ultimately, it involves love, and unconditional love to a degree. But can you cite? I mean, in your work with couples, can you talk about a silver lining in this whole thing, because it is a crisis to a degree. In some ways, there's more freedom now. But can you talk about what gives you hope for the modern healthy sexual paradigm?
I like that question a lot.
Good.
I think what gives me hope is that when we start with like where we are and not like meaning like a truth that wants to be told in the relationship, or a creativity, or like the hope comes from, I think, the capacity that I see in people's hearts and our ability to attune to wisdom, to allow for something bigger to start moving in the bedroom beyond just like personalities and egos.
I dig.
And that starts to happen when we open into the kind of vulnerability of the moment of what it is to turn to your lover and really be connected there and be interested in what's possible in the space without agenda. That I think magic unfolds all the time when we start with reality and we just become open to possibility. And both people can agree to say, I'm in this. I'm going to get triggered. I'm going to freak out. I don't know where we're going. I am scared. but I'm like in this for this conversation or for this exploration. Do you want to be here? I mean, I think there's a crisis point that is a really powerful catalyst that actually a lot of couples shy away from in order to keep the relationship intact. It's like all the things that stay unsaid. And then it's like when someone's just like, hey, we gotta like go here. This is not working for me, or I am so sad, or I miss you so much. Where are you? Where are you when we're in bed making love? Where are you? What are you not saying? The ability to bring emotion into the bedroom, to bring talking, to bring friendship into the sex bed. I mean, I think what I have hope in, and I experience this when I like especially go to college campuses, because I work with like large groups of people in those rooms,
Sure.
is that once I start talking about like, hey guys, like nobody knows what's going on. Nobody was ever taught. We have something moving in us that is actually so innocent and so explorative and so curious, and that we knew as children in our sensual bodies, and we played with our genitals, and we ran around wondering what was happening there, and that there was an innocence. And then we all felt our way in the dark into whatever it meant to be a sexual adult. And usually there's a lot of like faking it and pretending and not telling the truth, just to be like, well, shit, like no one told me how to do this. I guess this is how I'll do it. And then you have two people in bed making love to each other, not saying a word about what is true. And to just open it into the territory of like, it's not personal. And if you can both open into that exploration of like, can we kind of start over? Can two married people let themselves be 13 together again and start at the beginning of an exploration? Wow, how does this feel? Ooh, I've never thought about touching that part of your body like that. Let's stay in bed for 2 hours and give ourselves the game of no penetration. How creative, how much pleasure can we create here without penetration? And you've got me for 2 hours, baby. What are you gonna do with it? We're gonna have to talk. We're gonna have to like get creative.
Oh man.
I mean, like and it's not just physical. That turn on comes from being with a lover and then having them look at you and be like, I have something I want to tell you that I've never told anybody. Or I have like this thing I've been thinking about that I think I want to do, but I'm scared. And to have that make it into the bedroom, the erotic is so much bigger than just like the mechanics of sex.
No, the problem is the way society tells us is that ultimately, regardless of whether you spend 2 hours or 2 minutes, the end result needs to be intercourse. So there's always scheming going on, right? There's no time to really be in these moments where, let's have an authentic conversation about what you're talking about. There's just no, because ultimately it's like, how can we get to the end result? Somehow there's a result there.
Right.
So I mean,
and you're totally right.
Yeah.
I love how you say scheming. It's always kind of in the back of the mind.
It's the guy, because I mean that's sort of the male animal. I mean, unfortunately, it's look at the predators that exist today. I mean, you see, we are all human animals. I mean, some are more evolved than others, but the way we treat each other is pretty primitive. And you have just. I must ask you about how often, if at all, do you recommend, because you're talking about people that come in to see you with very rigid thought patterns. Either they're very down on the person for a variety of reasons, or they've built up these things in their mind. I mean, it can be across the board as it relates to diet, politics, anything. It doesn't matter, but they have these rigid thought patterns. And I noticed that you live in the elevated sanctuary of Santa Fe, and I wonder how often you prescribe or recommend ayahuasca retreats for some couples.
So I don't really work with couples like that. Like, all of the people I work with come through my 3-month program, and that's like a longer program.
Right.
I don't recommend ayahuasca ceremonies. It's not because I don't recommend them. It's just not what I do.
But let me ask you a
Like,
question. How do you, Joel, for people that come in a struggling relationship, how do you break them out of those rigid thought patterns, holistically? So forget ayahuasca. I mean, that's the point. Because you have to get them thinking differently, that they would, in the past, they'd be like, let's just get this over with, I'm done. And now all of a sudden I'm open to the idea of 2 hours of a hang, you know?
Well, so it's actually in partly how I craft my 3-month program. And this isn't a sell. It's just like, not everybody comes to work with me because I'm not the right starting point for everyone. The people that come
clearly.
and you can see that on my website, is that there has to be something that actually speaks to you in the language of our sexual energy is our fundamental energy, and it is connected to so much more than sex. It is like, so as soon as someone walks through the door of my 3-month program, there is already some awareness and territory that they have tread. And I don't technically, like, quote, work with couples. If a couple wants to do the program, I ask them to both do the program individually, because I'm not a couples counselor, but I talk about those dynamics a lot. And I have a lot of individuals that are in couples that do the program.
Right.
And what that says is, like, you come on a journey with me for 3 months. And this is not a quick fix. This is not an overnight thing. And you're only going to come in here if you're actually interested in a transformation and you're really interested at looking at yourself and being open to something. So I don't sit down with couples. I don't have couples counseling sessions. There's a very particular way I work on purpose, because it's a long I'm not a couples therapist.
No, I don't mean it like that, but there's no way,
yeah.
There is no way, even though I love to talk about the multidimensional self and leaving the physical body, not during sex, but during letting the body dance during musical performances. I want to be clear about that. I mean, the point is that, in order to have a healthy sexual relationship, both people have to be on board. I mean, ultimately that was, at the end of the day, I had a 13-year marriage, and some parts of it were very beautiful, and towards the end it was pretty dysfunctional. And I haven't had a lot of partners in my life. I've had a lot of pleasure in my life. I don't delve. I guess as I wrap up part 1 here with you, I wanted to ask you about. I understand that we're inundated with media. I use new media as a platform to drive consciousness through the content that I call. But I don't ever do digital porn. I don't really watch any TV. And I'm just trying to figure out why, if you tell people to unplug from life in order to get back into their body, younger cats especially, because, we are more tactily addicted sexually today than ever before. I just wonder if you can talk about, if you think it's a crisis, especially with the younger generations, about not being able to feel intimacy with a human being and more getting off on a digital apparatus.
So what's the question? Sorry, what's the question in that?
The question is it a crisis? And what do you talk to younger cats about as it relates to human intimacy as compared to digital intimacy?
Yeah, I think it actually is a crisis for younger generations, in a way that, I'm 40, people my age and older and maybe a little younger, I don't think we understand the pervasion.
No,
of
we don't.
That
Definitely don't. Yeah.
Is picking up, a phone and watching hardcore porn at his fingertips when he's 8. That is shaping him. And I think the thing I talk about with those students is I paint a picture to say, just so you know, all the stuff that's rolling out for you in your actual sexual relationship, if you're trying to mimic porn, you already know that it feels like a lot of effort. You already know that you feel like you have to put on some like big something that feels like it takes a lot of work. And I just make evident to them that like, here's why it feels so weird, because it's actually not natural. Not that like sex isn't natural, but I basically just tried to point out to them like, hey, if you're going to continue down this road, which you probably are, what you need to know is that you are conditioning your own body into a pretty narrow definition of what it needs to have sex. And the demand on your partner of what you want them to act like and sound like and look like is also really narrow. It's like I just tried to paint the picture of this really isn't realistic or feasible. I mean, I do that over like a long period of time, but I think it is a crisis, and it's not a quick fix. There's nothing about it that's a quick fix. But I think one of the best things that kids can experience is how weird it feels to try to have sex like a porn star. How shitty it feels. That something in them knows that I'm acting right now. I'm acting, and this feels off. And this is hard.
Sarah Byrden, we just cooked for an hour. I really would love to pick up and do part 2 with you pretty soon, if possible. I just feel like we're really just getting started here.
Okay, well, let's talk about that.
All right. Yeah. Bless you. Have a beautiful evening. I'm very humbled that you went there with me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake, for the invitation.
Did you have fun?
I did have fun.
Good. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. See you later.